Hello everyone, Frost here. Welcome back to a new video. World of Warcraft accomplished what no other MMO has done to date. Created the best story ever told in a game. The lore of World of Warcraft is by far the richest story in any MMO or game ever created. There are entire websites dedicated to only the world of Azeroth and uncovering its characters, locations and bosses. The creativity of Blizzard is unlike no other, which is why they can capitalize on their customers by releasing expansion packs so often, creating new stories and therefore new adventures. There are also numerous World of Warcraft novels and short stories that the game is based on. Today we're going to focus on the lore surrounding vanilla raids and try to tell the story as we experienced it back then. Onyxia and Molten Core. The story of Onyxia takes place in the time when the humans of Stormwind had completed the reconstruction of their city with the help of the Masons. A deal made between House of Nobles, Council of Stormwind at that time, and the Stonemasons, which were a guild of artisans and builders led by Edwin Van Cleef. A lot of conflict and tensions arose during the rebuilding of Stormwind due to a spy infiltrated in the House of Nobles who played with the minds of the Masons, telling them to ask for more money, and at the same time telling the council to refuse paying them. King Varian often paid from his own pockets just to keep the city in peace, but suddenly the king disappeared without a trace, lost in a mysterious diplomatic mission. Young Anduin, his son, only a boy, took his place and ruled the city. But his rule was a facade, more of a figurehead, and the real power was in the hands of High Lord Bolvar Fordragon and Lady Katrana Prester. When the building was completed, the nobles refused to pay the workers and ordered the guild disbanded. Many left with Edwin Van Cleef and formed the Defias Brotherhood. With the armies of Stormwind called away to fight the savage horde on distant battlefields, it was up to the citizens to defend Stormwind. Many threats were approaching the gates and many issues to deal with. Onyxia was one of them. Although it seemed like a distant threat, little did they know it was already knocking at their doors. Onyxia's lair required completing a long and adventurous attunement chain, one that told two very different stories for Alliance and Horde. For Alliance, it involved a quest chain that revealed an impostor in Stormwind's council. Lady Katrana Prester was no lady at all. She was Onyxia herself, playing with the mind of Bolvar and Anduin and messing with the kingdom right under everyone's noses. It was an adventure that took players into the depths of Blackrock to initiate a heroic rescue, and later witness a heroic sacrifice. The Alliance story with Onyxia wasn't just dragons are evil, it was personal. For the Horde, the story was totally different. Rexxar, the champion of the Horde, told people about what happened in Eastern Kingdoms, and eventually word reached to Thrall that Onyxia used trickery and deception to disguise herself as a member of Stormwind's royal court. Thrall knew that the Horde's position with the Alliance was a shaky one. Conflicts and battles were reported almost every day. But Thrall didn't want the presumed peace to descend into chaos. More importantly, Onyxia's lair was situated in Kalimdor, relatively close to several Horde settlements and capital cities. For the safety of the Horde, she had to be taken down. Beyond that, both factions were equally threatened by what lurked into the Molten Core. Ragnaros rested below the mountain. Sorcerer Tain Torisan was the leader of the Dark Irons clan Shadowars, and he was the one responsible for summoning Ragnaros the Firelord into Azeroth. Fortunately or unfortunately, the summoning did not bring him fully into the world because Tain Torisan had perished and the Firelord could not simply return to Firelands, his home. For 300 years Ragnaros was stuck, unable to access or use his full power, unable to retreat, forced to reside in the Molten Core and gather his loyal servants around him, attempting to prepare and gather his strength. And on that glorious day, faction would cease to matter because the whole world would be engulfed in flames. With the conflict between Ragnaros and the orcs that took residence into the upper planes of the Blackrock Spire, the Horde and the Alliance knew it was time to strike. Each side worked on ending the threat in their own way, but the reasons behind it were clear to both sides. The Molten Core wasn't the only threat held in Blackrock Mountain. Ragnaros, his fire elementals, and the Dark Iron Dwarves he'd enslaved were at constant battle with the Dark Horde of Blackrock's upper reaches. With Ragnaros removed, that left the upper half of the mountain free to do as they pleased. This was fine with Nefarian, Onyxia's brother, who was spending his time performing twisted experiments with the blood of other dragonflights. It wasn't fine with the Alliance, since Blackrock Mountain was pretty much in the heart of Alliance territory. The Blackrock orcs under Nefarian's command were set on terrorizing settlements in the Red Ridge Mountains. By clearing out Blackrock Mountain, the Alliance could re-establish their dominance in the area and snuff out the Dark Horde. Peace would, in theory, be restored. For the Horde, the presence of the Dark Iron Horde was an insult. They called themselves the True Horde and didn't recognize Thrall as the war chief. Led by Ren Blackhand, the Dark Horde continued to survive and thrive solely because of Nefarian's protection. If Thrall had any hope for eventual peace with the Alliance and the rest of Azeroth, the impostors and their protector needed to be taken out. In the jungles of Stranglethorn, a new enemy arose, one that was a threat to both Alliance and Horde. Years before, the Atali priesthood, an influential group of troll priests, called forth an avatar of an ancient god. The priests were defeated and exiled from Stranglethorn by the rest of the Gurubashi, aided by the Zandalari. But their efforts to bring Hakar the Soulflayer into this world did not give any results. Eventually, they discovered that the temple they built in Swamp of Sorrows couldn't be used to summon Hakar. He had to be summoned in the ancient capital of Gurubashi Empire, Zul Gurub. So they moved in, enslaving several high priests of the Gurubashi to help them bring the blood god back to life. These attempts caught the attention of the Zandalari tribe. The Zandalari had dealt with and defeated Hakar once before. They weren't about to allow him make a return. But they couldn't do so on their own, and this time there wasn't a united Gurubashi Empire to ally with. Instead, there were the Alliance and the Horde. The Zandalari cared little for any factions and their conflicts. All they cared about was that the threat had to be dealt with and Hakar's return had to be stopped. So they recruited champions from both sides, not out of any love for either one, but because it was the only thing they had to work with. This marked the first appearance of Zandalari, a neutral group, one that players could even gain reputation with. We didn't know at that time what kind of threat the Zandalari posed. They were trying to help us and help Azeroth, and that was enough for both factions to agree and help out. One of the most epic storylines came from the desert of Silithus, though uninhabited for the majority of vanilla WoW. Sealed behind the Scarab Wall was an ancient temple crawling with enemies we barely understood. But the Qiraji were venturing out from behind that wall, and it earned the concern of the Bronze Dragonflight. They knew what lurked in the depths of Ahn Qiraj, and it had to be stopped before the Qiraji and the old god they worshipped consumed the whole of Azeroth. A temple that was built to serve as a prison for Kutun and his minions, a temple that was leaking, and the old god of madness and chaos was getting ready to have his revenge for 1,000 years of imprisonment. The issue had to be dealt with, and the only way to stop it was to cut it from the root, go straight to the core, and neutralize the old god. But first, the Scarab Wall had to be opened. The gates of Ahn Qiraj were sealed by a powerful magic, and to open them, the brave heroes of Azeroth had to go through a number of trials to reconstruct a long-lost artifact, the Scepter of the Shifting Sands. This scepter was used to open the Scarab Wall, but behind them, a mighty Qiraji army was waiting. To repel it, the combined military might of both Alliance and Horde had to be ready outside the wall, and to be ready, a great number of supplies to gather. Food, bandages, metals, and herbs. Once all was ready, the hero that held the scepter had to open the gates, and the Ahn Qiraj war to begin. Through the course of the scepter's reconstruction, people of Azeroth learned about the old war of the Shifting Sands, and the more they discovered, the bigger the threat became in their eyes. Enormous efforts were made during that time, both individual and in group. Heroes were made, and their name echo even today. And the threat of Qiraji was a force to be reckoned with, one that could not be dealt by one faction over the other. For the first time since the Third War, both Alliance and Horde came together into one massive army, the might of Kalimdor. Together, they stood their ground as the gates of Ahn Qiraj were opened, and the Qiraji poured forth in full force. It was a show-stopping server-wide battle that ended with the Qiraji retreating, and our assault into the temple of Ahn Qiraj. High above the eastern Plaguelands, the dread citadel Naxxramas lay dormant for most of the vanilla timeline. The Flying Citadel was the seat of the Lich King power in Azeroth. Deep inside, Kel'Thuzad served as an ambassador of the Lich King, initiator of the Scourge, and the undead plague spreader that haunted the ruined hills of Lordaeron for years. Kel'Thuzad was not always the evil Lich from Naxxramas. He used to be a member of the Council of Six, the High Council of Kirin Tor, Masters of Dalaran. Even from an early age, he had a thirst for knowledge, a thirst that could never be fulfilled. He was known for being drawn to the dark side, often insisting to study the forbidden arts of necromancy. Driven to learn all he could from the magical world and its shadowy wonders. He was frustrated by what he saw at his comrades, often calling them outdated and with unimaginative percepts. Eventually he was cast out by his comrades, exiled, forced to wander the frozen wastes. But he was not alone. The voice of the Lich King guided him in his journey. A journey of discovery, of witnessing great power, and unheard of sorcery. Everything he ever wanted was at his grasp, and he was willing to pay the price of great power. Little was known about Kel'Thuzad since his exile, until his return. While Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade were fighting the hordes of undead scourge that lingered in the Plaguelands, they discovered the great threat from Naxxramas. Both Alliance and Horde were welcomed by the Argent Dawn. It was a neutral organization, focused not on factional conflicts, but on the lingering threat of the Scourge. Eventually, between the Argent Dawn's efforts and the constant attacks from the Scarlet Crusade, Naxxramas' defenses were weakened enough that players could venture inside. There, they faced the horrors of the Scourge and Kel'Thuzad himself. Lore surrounding Naxxramas was particularly interesting. Not everything in the Argent Dawn was around the Citadel, as players discovered when they returned Kel'Thuzad's phylactery to Father Inigo Montoy. Montoy was a little too eager to get that thing in his hands, and later we found out he took the phylactery into Northrend, giving Kel'Thuzad time to regenerate so he could once again rule Naxxramas. More importantly, casters were tasked with tracking down Atiesh, Grey Staff of the Guardian. The staff once belonged to Medivh, but was shattered into pieces during the destruction of Dalaran in the Third War. And for a few lucky adventurers, a certain blade, thought lost to time, would be found. The corrupted Ashbringer, which held the spirit of High Lord Morgraine, who was not happy with his death at the hands of his son Renault. Taking the blade to Scarlet Monastery resulted in a jaw-dropping lore event in which Morgraine finally got his vengeance. As for the blade, it was beyond redemption. The disjointed nature of vanilla raids was much like the leveling experience, a little clumsy. Raids didn't really have anything to do with each other, but each raid told its own sweeping tale, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for WoW's ongoing story. Naxxramas' return in Wrath of the Lich King, our efforts in Blackrock Mountain were met with retaliation and cataclysm. The Zandalari switched sides and made their return in Mist of Pandaria. And Kutun was just our first glimpse into the horrifying truth about the old gods, a threat that was never really taken care of. Vanilla may not have been a seamless tale like the expansion that followed, but it was a vital, instrumental part of making WoW what it is today. These tales of old may not be the most elegantly told, but they represent a solid foundation of story that still stays strong after more than a decade since the game was released. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. Until next time, stay frosty.